It is my great pleasure to introduce Mr. Scott Poole, software developer for 9 years, poet for 25. Some of you may know him already as the house poet for Livewire radio show here in Portland. It's my pleasure to introduce Scott Poole talking about poetry and programming today.
Thanks for having me here. After a long day of listening to coding lectures, doing a talk on programming or on poetry is probably the last thing you want to do. It's like going to the dentist after work. So I appreciate you coming. I thought I'd start off with a poem so you can see what kind of poet I am. They're all different kinds of poets, just like there's all different kinds of programming languages. So you'll know who I am after I read this one to you. I want to dedicate this one to my brother because I never had a brother, so I want to dedicate this one to him. This is called For the Brother I Never Had. You would have had long hair and liked to play chess, and you wouldn't have had freckles like me, and I would have hated you at times for that. You would mention to me at a party when we were drunk adults that you actually liked dressing as a nun, and prayed heavily that no one in the family would find out. And after all that praying, figured you were a nun. So that's why you left the house after your junior year in college to move to Taos to open a taco ice cream stand. You know, ice cream in the shape of tacos. And who would have thought it would have attracted so many women that would later nominate you Mr. Taos, and you would star in a charity calendar with earthenware and beads strategically placed, but not strategic enough. And that's why Mother went into a rage and threw the turkey out into the backyard. One Thanksgiving when you couldn't make it home, and Dad and I sat there stunned, watching it steam in the pouring rain, and all we could wish now, surrounded by our hunger, was that you'd never been born. So now you know what you're getting into. This is the question I get at parties when people find out if I'm a poet and a programmer. They're like, what? That's like saying that you're a shepherd and a hedge fund manager, something like that. One would think they're totally opposites. One requires a computer, the other doesn't. One helps people every day of their lives, the other doesn't. One uses the language side of the brain and the other uses the math side of the brain. It's as if they imagine me going to work in the morning in jeans, a button-up shirt with a t-shirt showing by the neck, and a hoodie on. Okay, I gotta get my programmer gear on now. This is my Livewire hoodie. Kind of excited about it. And, oh, that feels better. And a black turtleneck, and then after coding all day, I eat a meal, and then I change into all black, a black turtleneck sweater, a beret, dark sunglasses, then get out my bongos, and I retreat to the attic and write with a broken pencil on dirty paper really bad poems while I drink wine. The thing is, and then at some point, snapping got into it. Like, people think at poetry readings you're supposed to snap. Don't do that, you'll get your ass kicked. But, and it's just because hipsters kind of took over the poetry scene in the 60s and ruined the stereotype of poet forever. But don't think you're out of the woods yet, developers, because you're next as soon as hipsters learn how to program. I like that this guy hasn't quite figured out how to use the headphones. I think that's toilet paper sticking out of his ear. And he hasn't figured out that the computer is supposed to face you and that it's got to turn on too, you know. So I think once he gets that turned around, we're in trouble. So, but really poets and programmers are not that different. We're all just introverts at heart. And now I'm going to read a poem about introverts. Introverts don't see the point in ironing a shirt. We like to stand in people's living rooms when they're not there and imagine the conversation we might have with them. Build a replica of their house inside their house, entirely out of books, suiting their interests and learning level, have coffee in the little house, listen to public radio, then pack it all up before they arrive as if nothing ever happened. We don't even see the point of other people. We all eventually try to find a dream cabin in the woods where we can finally write a world-changing novel that no one will ever read. But if we ever find the cabin, it's full of other introverts with more ambition, quietly eating sandwiches, vaguely tasting a mosquito repellent. Yet still, introverts remain useful in today's society. For instance, if there were no introverts, public radio would fold in a week. It's introverts reading introverted things to other introverts without having to gaze upon each other's faces with their accompanying introverted or extroverted nose hair. And when we go to sleep, after a long day of hiding, every introvert has the same dream of a creative sheep ripping wool off its own side, knitting little booties for its hooves so it can tiptoe quietly away from the other sheep, a sheep that's quietly pleading, or bleeding, I guess, to only you, don't count me, don't count on me tonight, please don't. Okay, anyway, I can take that off now. It's like 300 degrees up here, so I'm going to take this off. But, okay, so I like the idea of a poet wearing a black turtleneck. And it's like, who else is famous for wearing a black turtleneck? So, you know, they're not that different. And you're going to say, wait, hold on. Steve Jobs is not a programmer. He was a computer salesman. But this person here, I can assure you, isn't a poet either. So I like the idea of poets hanging out in cafes and writing poetry. Wait, who else hangs out in cafes and writes things? Programmer, poet. They look a lot alike, don't they? It's really hard to tell them apart. One looks vaguely alt with a hint of screen time burn, but the other one has a slight goth vibe with the no-nonsense look of I've spent time in the fields of white mining rhymes, man. I don't know, is she saying, hey, Shelley, I just finished testing my Celsius to Fahrenheit module. Nailed it! Or she's saying, I just encapsulated the entire scope of the human experience in a water buffalo metaphor in less than 8 lines. Nailed it! It's just too hard to tell these days. I mean, poets were famous for hanging out in San Francisco in cafes. Wait, who else hangs out in San Francisco in cafes? Who are they? Which one's the poet? Which one's the That's got to be a programmer. This guy's playing in, he got up on the chair and took this picture. That guy's confused. He might be a poet. I don't know. The only difference between the stereotypes seems to be that the poet will get up on a microphone and read the poem out loud to an audience of other poets in the cafe, but I've never heard of a programmer standing up and reading his code to an audience in a cafe, but I don't think it's too far behind. You know, he'd be like, hey man, check this out. I wrote this next method for a specific manager I really wanted to impress. It has nested for loops, uses 3 interfaces, a generic, a link statement, and it's all on one line. For each in an in list, curly brace. If parentheses x is not equal to null, man. Could get there. So there's similar elements, and I just wanted to point these out here that people say, well, there's no rhyming in poetry or in programming. Well, there's loops and recursion, which is exactly what rhyme is doing. It's just bringing back a sound meaning again and again and again, and every time that sound comes back, there's a slightly different context for it, different variables, so it's not that much different. And this, some of the things I think about as I'm coding. Conditional logic, if statements, metaphor and simile. What if your love is like a red, red rose? You know, off you go. Line breaks. Line breaks. I love line breaks. I wish I could have done everything in line breaks like in 3rd grade, because I just get tired after about 6 words, and I just think that's enough. That's going way too far over the right side of the page. People say, how do poets figure out line breaks? And they'll say, oh, it has to do with stress and enjambment. No, it's just like, that looks too long. Cut it. Comments. Just like in my taco ice cream, tacos in the shape of ice cream. That's, there's comments in poems too. Subjects, variables, and objects. You just have your subject. The human experience, though, is your code library, which is huge, which means you can write about anything, but it's a little hard to filter it down. Whereas you can just pick a few code libraries there. The thing about UI design, you look at a website, first thing you're like, oh yeah, well, who are they trying to impress with this? And the same with the poetry. If somebody's like, in the dark night, a black owl flew to a dead tree. You're like, oh my God, I gotta leave. Tone of language makes a big difference in poetry. So you have testing, which is great. But for poets, it's doing poetry readings and seeing the dark by yourself, self-loathing. It's much harder programming, yes. Requirements, it's like you have people who write requirements. How great is that? It'd be like, this one's for Aunt Millie, it has to have flowers in it, it has to rhyme, it has to be less than 18 lines, it has to have enjambment, and nobody has to know what it means. And you'd be like, yeah, I could nail that. Oh, whoops. Okay, so there's dissimilar elements too. First of all, there's no data access layer, except maybe if you took the nouns and the verbs and made Mad Lib spaces for them and then ran code through it, and then you would get something like, 2 cheetahs diverged in a bathroom and I ate the one less stinky, It kind of ruins the poem. Code, you could just spills tons of data out everywhere, so it's good for that. Only works on humans. I've tried reading poems to my toaster. It just kind of sits there and goes. It attracts the opposite sex. Yes, I started writing poetry to get dates. It worked. It's how I got my wife. But be careful. It works really good. You might end up getting married for 22 years. Code is getting better. In the 80s, nobody would talk to a programmer, okay? But now you've got Thor being a black hat hacker in a movie, which makes no sense. Nobody's that good looking. And the guy who's playing Steve Jobs, come on, that guy's gorgeous. Okay, so poetry's totally unpopular. Code's super popular right now with people who are using it. And of course, you're poor as dirt as a poet, and you make bucks as a programmer. So. But the activities aren't that different, so it's really stressful to me. But I'm so glad I'm here to talk to you guys about this, because why is poetry unpopular? Why? At literary conferences, everyone's just like, why is poetry so unpopular? Are we not rhyming enough? Are we just not flashy enough? Do we need to do everything in rap now? What's the deal, How come nobody reads poetry anymore? Well, you can never explain it to a literary audience, but you can explain it here, and it's so great. Software regex of an input is that's for a date, right? It's easy. If that's correct, input goes in, machine does what you want, right? That's nice. The regex for a human is a little more complicated, especially when they're listening to a poet. It's something like that. There's little things in there like, my uncle so. And that's just the first page. So, I'm so glad I got to do a regex joke. It's just so awesome. Okay, so in the beginning, poetry and programming have been together for a long time. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was God. Well, even if you don't believe in God, it's the fact that Word made it into a line in the Bible is awesome. I mean, come on. It's like, yeah, I'm a poet. I'm in the beginning. But also, who is in the Word is from the Greek translation is logos, which is, as you know, a word, speech, divine utterance, and analogy, but it's also where we get logic. So you've got programming and poetry together. So what I like about this is you've got Robert Frost over here. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. 2 roads. I always think of him kind of like being like a 14-year-old girl, like 2 roads diverged in the wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that's made all the difference. And this one, you know, if path 1 travelers counts less than, okay, I'm sorry. If path 1 dot travelers dot count is less than path 2, okay, so I won't do it that way, but the QA people are probably screaming in their heads right now. Okay, what if the paths are equally worn? It's like, what the hell? Well, earlier in the poem, he actually does say the paths are basically worn the same. And the little secret about this poem is he's actually lying. He never took the less traveled path because there wasn't one to take because they were equally worn. So he just wants to say, I took the one less traveled by. So don't think, when people say that, you know, you gotta be careful. Okay, also it's where we get logo, duh, so, and also Lego. So I say this is completely related to programming. So in the beginning was Chewbacca, I think. That's where my line of logic goes. I wanna read a poem, speaking of Chewbacca. This is called Thoughts on Chewbacca. Lying in bed this morning, wondering why I didn't die mercifully in my sleep. I wanted to cry out. I wanted to cry out like Chewbacca. Sometimes I wish I had only one thing to say. People would ask, how are you doing? Or could you do me a favor? And all I could say is, in case you're wondering how that's spelled, it's how it spells, so. And that would be enough. How beautiful is Chewbacca's cry, part whine, part existential resignation, and mostly indecipherable to those not hip enough to understand. I imagine myself as Chewbacca sometimes when I'm lying on the living room floor watching television. I would look just like a bad rug from the 70s, which I can imagine was the original inspiration for the character. I would love to be hidden in plain sight. How nice that would be. Then, as everyone is settled into their program, after all the guests have been served their drinks, I jump up on my own terms at my own time and let fly with a melodic and soulful, okay, everybody together. Very good. Then maybe people might know as the drinks fly and the screams ring out, they might really know what it feels like to be a beautiful carpet, hopeful of walking on something besides yourself. Thank you. Okay, the first programmer, dun dun dun. Okay, that's not the first programmer. This is another connection between poetry and programming that goes way back. This doof here is Lord Byron. He was an English Romantic poet. He is widely considered one of the leading British Romantic poets of all time, and he was the ultimate overblown Romantic poet. He wrote Don Juan, so he considered himself a Don Juan, of course, because he was bored one day. He joined the Greek army to fight the Turks, but died of a cold before he ever saw battle. He hated technology. He was actually a Luddite, which are people hate technology. And by Luddite, I mean he actually hung out with Ned Ludd, the guy Luddites named after, and he went from factory to factory smashing automatic looms. And this just happens to, his daughter was the first programmer. Ada, Countess of Lovelace, This is actually Ada Lovelace Day, somebody wrote. I think Moss posted that somewhere. So, but just by coincidence. Ironically, Ada, her mother, hated Byron, mainly because he was sleeping with everyone and would do stuff like take off and join the Greek army and die. So Lady Byron, fearing her daughter would become a total flaky poet like Byron, encouraged Ada to take up math, the thing she thought was the most opposite of poetry. But when she saw a demonstration by Charles Babbage of his analytical machine, she was hooked. I did work on that at Freightliner, I think. Using punch cards, she wrote the world's first program. It had recursive loops, operations, destination registers, and comments, and her first program calculated the Bernoulli numbers. No easy mathematical feat. So there was too much, but what's interesting is that she was really still couldn't hide the poet part of herself, and she predicted that we would use machines like this for something besides numbers. It says the analytical engine might act upon other things besides numbers, she said, were objects whose mutual fundamental relations could be expressed by those of the abstract science of operations. So that, even though it's kind of geeky, is a poetic thought. An equation of words that can carry anything in the world. So poor Byron, he was completely plowed over by technology. You know who else? And, there's another guy out there who's kind of plowed over by technology, and I think his days are kind of getting numbered, is death. And I want to read a poem about that called Death Drives a Riding Lawnmower. Too many old people now. Even death grows too old. They took away his driver's license. They took away his driver's license. Now he's forced to drive a riding lawnmower to make his faithful rounds, which frankly sucks for him because the Scythe used to fit great on the ski rack of the Subaru. And where do you stick a scythe on a John Deere X5 Yard King without the handle popping off the grass catcher when you're in hot pursuit of a 57-year-old aortal hemorrhage about to blow near the Jamba Juice? People who should be dead are huffing and puffing around everywhere. That guy eating a Whopper isn't even breathing. Nobody fears him anymore. Who fears death when he's arriving at a noisy 3 miles an hour? Brrr. It's getting a bit embarrassing. Harder to explain to the big boss. Take these kids frolicking all over his lawn. He could just mow them down to reach the weekly quota, but the mower's scythe attachment doesn't reap saplings well. He'd have to climb off the porch, kneel on the ground, and hand pluck them from the earth's grasp. He'd grass stain his Holocaust cloak. His back's infinity-year-old T6 vertebrae will tighten up. Forget about it. What a hassle. He tries to heart attack them with thunder yelling, and tries to well falling down them with pecking seagull swooping, or tries to cramps drown them with swimming less than a half hour after eating. Nothing's working. He's considering buying a drone. And what's this he reads now in his favorite magazine, Time? It says right here, the current generation, the one trampling his pansies, might be the last one to die. Well, what's the use anymore? You'll have 300-year-olds yelling at 200-year-olds to get off your lawn. What the hell is a black-cloaked skeleton with excellent farming and communication skills supposed to do in this economy? He gives up. It's 3 o'clock anyway. Time to go to dinner. Depressed Death climbs onto his X5 Yard King, tries to mow down his lawn frolickers, who easily move out of the way, and points his green death ship towards Denny's. For the moon's over my hammy plate, and perhaps, if he's lucky, some low-hanging, bacon-eating fruit. Are we doing okay on time? Okay. What is a quality poem? So since this is a quality conference, I got quality in here. It's useful to your life. You'll think about it in your tough times of your life. It offers a new perspective. Maybe now you will think about death driving a lawnmower, Effects are repeatable. I've read this poem before, and people have laughed about the bacon-eating line before. Reliable results. It inspires other work, like you write a core product, other people develop off of it, and it makes you feel something. Well, wait a minute, hold on. Code makes you feel something? I don't think that one really works. But if AI develops far enough, then machines will begin complaining about the code you're feeding them, just like audiences complain about poets. And so I think there's a new term we should come up with that's going to be necessary. Poets are going to be really sought after. I mean, signing bonus is everything. Proet grammar is coming. So get ready, because you start, when machines become sentient, then they're going to be like, you try to compile your code in them, and they'll go, I don't get it. Why don't your variable names rhyme? I only like listening to Mark Zuckerberg's code. Can it be more about flowers? Can you write this without any if statements? I'm hungry. Can we do this later? Can you do this in a rap? I don't know. I recently read a news story about the first talking robot in space. As a developer, I couldn't help but think about how horrible of an idea that would be. Did anyone see 2001? Space Odyssey? Horrible idea to have a talking robot in space. But they did it recently. He was about this big. He was like this little cute little thing, right? And I just imagine the conversation the robot's having when nobody's talking to him back. Listen to your robot companion in the coldness of space. It's time for you to eat. It's unfortunate you have to eat. I don't have to eat. I get a lot done while you're sleeping. You're not very productive at 3 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. I made a friend with the blackness of space while you were in the bathroom. I've never even gone to the bathroom. Do you want to eat cheese now? Colby, Swiss, or Gruyere? Should I just keep asking questions till you answer? Did you clean your helmet? Are you going to press the red button? Because it needs to be pressed pretty soon. It was 12.3 seconds between your sneezes. Would you like to improve your math scores? Do you know that one of your toes is statistically longer than it should be? Why do you eat corn dogs in the nude 93% of the time? Is it better to say nude or naked? I notice you're getting irritable. Perhaps you should take up transcendental meditation. I can meditate, but I know ahead of time what I'm going to think about, so I guess I won't do that. You didn't put the clip back on the bread. Why do you keep sticking labels on my chest with the label baby that say STFU? Do you miss human sexual activity? Is it depressing to know you're going to die, perhaps in a gruesome, lonely, or tragic way, and I will always live as long as there is a source of solar power in the sky? Hello? Hello? So, I'd like to leave you with a good quote that I think this is a great description of the difference between prose and poetry. If people ever ask you, it's not just that poetry has line breaks. I wish our clever young poets would remember my homely definitions of prose and poetry. That is prose, words in their best order, poetry, the best words in their best order. I think by looking at those key words there, you can understand what would a quality program be too. I wish our clever young programmers would remember my homely definitions of software and quality software. That is software code in its best working order, quality software, the best code in the best working order. So. Time, I could do questions or I could read one more poem that I have. Poem? Okay. See, I got my book here. I got one from my... This one, where is it? It's called, I had it marked, I'm sorry, and then I grabbed the wrong book. I know. Just read one, dummy. Dying Wishes is what it's called on page 61. So glad I included the table of contents. Dying Wishes. How do you want to be buried? She asked me offhand one night in bed. Perhaps I should have been suspicious. But instead, I was suddenly in love. Well, if you really want to know, I say, I would love to be shot out of a cannon from the top of Beacon Rock, that 1,000-foot monolith of towering stone in the scenic Columbia River Gorge, while competing junior high school marching bands simultaneously play Battle Hymn of the Republic and that song that begins, I believe in miracles, by Hot Chocolate. And a small group of family and friends in tuxedos and cocktail dresses sit nearby on wooden chairs, sipping 25-year-old single malt scotch, everyone holding on his lap a small folio of my poem sprinkled with $1,000 perfume, all expertly written out in calligraphy on handmade Italian paper lined with gold leaf, each poem handpicked to individual tastes and life stage needs. Where the fuck am I going to get a cannon, she says. And in this instance, I realized my earlier feeling of love was but a speck compared to the love exploding within me, because now I can clearly see her with gray hair, wearing a cardigan, driving an old white Crown Victoria, going from Target to Walmart to Circuit City, desperately looking for a cannon while my corpse rots away in the back seat. How about I just roll your dead body off the roof and into the front yard? Deal? It's a deal, I say, because delirious in love, I can think of nothing else as she kisses me and turns off the lights. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Scott. That was awesome.